Genghis in Paradise, a short story. Our hero arrives on the Isle Sarong. Genghis, said Genghis, Frank Genghis. The inquiry was from a squat, yellow-eyed trooper, presumably Javanese, sporting a rusty AK-47 in a casual sling. His face was pocked, his brow was continuous. "Where you from?" he inquired further, in dicky English. There was really no need to ask, since it was all neatly profiled on our hero's passport, but the trooper would do as troopers will, and he was rankling in the sweaty dewdrops of the humid afternoon. The afternoon was bustling with squawking ladies and fast-moving Euro trash. There was no way on earth that Genghis was going to lift his trademark dark glasses, even though this was the subtext of the investigation. "Australia," he said, slightly impatient. He was itching for all the fare of a festive warong, a cigarette, and a Bahama mama or two with a squeeze of lemon on ice. The air was already spicy with pineapple. Paradise was just beyond the gates. "What you do here?" asked the trooper, unimpressed. "I'm a writer," said Genghis. "I'm here to do some writing." It was an incautious reply, as it happened. He was slightly off his guard. There are jurisdictions, of course, where such a confession would rouse the gnarly advent. Writers and Secret Service officers, for example, are often at unfriendly paces, or, as in this case, a boastful literati irks the semi-literate goon with a gun. Accordingly, the trooper grimaced, and Genghis noticed that his upper lip, furry with a weedy attempt at man hair, trembled in further yellow-eyed flits. "What you write?" the trooper wanted to know. The true answer was anything that pays, from epic poems to greeting card ditties, but the writer just said stories, without extra differentiations. In point of fact, he was working on a novel, or rather the novel, namely the great Australian novel, albeit still in the planning stages. He was fresh from ongoing success. He'd written the Great Tasmanian Mini-Saga, the Great Victorian Ode, and most recently, the Great Western Australian Blog Post. Now it was aloft, his magnus opus. A bout of ennui and a skirmish with a jealous husband with a bowie knife had convinced him of a change of scenery. How could the great Australian novel be written anywhere but outside of Australia after all? There was no prospect of explaining this to the livery trooper though, and there was in any case the ruffled weariness of the flight. There had been a touch of turbulence over the Timor Sea. Genghis just longed for his little share of Eden. "Stories?" asked the trooper, dense. "Once upon a time," said Genghis, laboured. The trooper fiddled with the passport some more. It became obvious that he was angling for bucksheesh. All the writer had on board was half a packet of Camel no filters and a pocket full of Australian shrapnel adorned with Her Majesty the Queen. The guy had picked the wrong tourist from the crowd. "You wait," the trooper then instructed. He was next intent to go behind a makeshift screen, flick aimless through some bogus paperwork, and possibly wangle a taxi scam as a plan B. But before he could delay the Australian any longer, a snazzy local, complete with batik, a man in his 40s, a man who didn't look like a teenager on a surf safari, stuck in his head and said in passable English, "What the problem here?" He grinned. It was the grin of a man worth money. The batik itself was bright blue and red, a sort of lazy palm tree design with an abstract swirl that made Genghis think of mini-golf. "I don't know," said Genghis. "I'm sure my passport's all in order, but this gentleman seems to be suggesting otherwise." The wealthy local summed up the situation. He rattled off a few sentences in unzipped Bahasa, and the trooper gave a brief reply. "Where you from?" was the next question again. "Australia," said the Australian. The wealthy local was overjoyed. "Oh, Australia!" he beamed. "My brother live in Australia." Then there was some more Bahasa. The trooper looked defeated. He gazed down at the passport, folded its royal blue officialdom together into a slim parcel, and reluctantly handed it back. "What bring you to the Isle Sarong?" asked the local. "Sunshine," said Genghis, as if it was in short supply back home. "How long you stay?" asked the local, continuing. "As long as it takes," said the visitor. "You have hotel?" "Not yet." Okay. The local beamed again. He was flashy and neat. Unusually, his teeth were all intact, and his wristwatch wasn't chintzy. His thick black hair was greased back to accentuate his round lunar domain, and, so Genghis noticed at this juncture, his feet were flat and brown and cradled in a nice array of leather sandals, such that only men of means might afford. He spoke a few more words to the goon, who hung his head and finally waved the Australian on. That's what it takes on the Isle Sarong. The right words from a local will open any doors. The visitor made his thanks in the taxi. The airport was on a treed peninsula along freeway from the city. The turquoise waters of the bay were shimmering on one side, and on the other, where Genghis peered over the sights within the dark penumbra of his famous shades, volcanic mountains, where once, they say, Krishna and Arjuna played in an Indian frolic, fortified the long horizon and framed the green lushness of the island with a startling blue remembrance of primal fire. "I don't know what the problem was," Genghis said, "but thanks for sorting it out. I owe you one." Okay, smiled the local. "No problem, mate. Australia all over." "So where exactly does your brother live?" Genghis eventually inquired. "You know Sydney Harbour Bridge?" "I've heard of it," Genghis admitted. "Just near there." It was time for jolly introductions. "Genghis," said Genghis. "Frank Genghis." "My name Harry," said the local. "Just Harry. Mr. Harry." "Well, Mr. Harry," said Genghis, "as I say, I owe you one, mate." Mr. Harry, though, was brimful of swift okays. It was a sign of his well-to-do. He wouldn't have his guest indebted. His hospitality knew no bounds. "You stay my place, Frank Genghis," he announced, and spoke with snappy purpose to the driver, who, the visitor could tell, was being well behaved. Genghis took it in his stride like any dose of sudden fortune. He thought, why not? And if it doesn't work out, I can always find a twin share with a swimming pool. "Very kind of you," he said. "First time on Isle Sarong?" "Yep. I show you round." There are times, Genghis thought, when it's foolish to kick a gift horse in the shins, and driving into the swarming suburbs of a tropical metropolis, unprepared and hungry and stretched out after a bumpy plane ride and a close encounter with a trooper wielding an assault rifle, are assuredly among them. Writing the great Australian novel was, in fact, third or fourth rank on his immediate list of things to do. Ahead of it was sampling the fruits of abundance, finding a decent spa, and seeing the whole hilly splendour of the equatorial wonder that was all about and ready to be seen. There was a new city to explore, full of new mischief too. "Much obliged," he said, thankful some more. You can be lucky, he thought. This Mr. Harry was obviously a man to mention, of all the people you might collude in an arrival lounge. It became even more apparent further into the journey. The local found occasion to boast of his belongings, several houses and apartments, and how he was just back from the USA on business for the third time this year. Was it an empty boast? Not at all. Eventually the taxi came to a huge testament to prosperity, a 2-story abode in an enclosed compound, and Mr. Harry made noises at the gate, and a gatekeeper in a spiffy uniform let them in. Before that, There were long suburbs of modest poverty, ramshackled bamboo, dirty streets, smelly canals. Mr. Harry was a man of clean, cool granite. A high fence kept out the riffraff. There was a gorgeous orange flower of startling aplomb blaring in the front garden, and shady palms and long steps are the sort of bad taste only a wealthy man could possibly manage. "Nice digs," Genghis admitted. So nice, in fact, that he did at last lift his trademark dark glasses in order to have a proper look-see. He was a handsome beast, Frank Genghis, in a way that writers rarely are, but he kept himself deliberately unkempt as a means, he would say, of keeping his prose more rugged and true. Australia had been good to him. He was well fed and a stranger to long bouts of celibacy. He had seen south-facing marvels. His university degree was on a low-interest loan he was determined never to repay. He called a white-painted terrace house in the back streets of Parramatta his fine ancestral presence. Mr. Harry's house was lavish. Genghis looked at its rare display. For all its luscious sunshine and pineapple aromas, the Isle Sarong was a land of contrasting measures. Most people, Genghis could tell just from the taxi trip, were poor but happy. A few, like Mr. Harry, were plump like plantains, rolling in it, commanding fortunes in the glitz of touristy largesse and unembarrassed bounty amid luxurious numbers. The local made the point of adding that he owned a light plane and resorts on outlying islands. Genghis added. He was certain he could get used to this type of treatment. A valet, maybe 14 years old, carried in his luggage. Then, making the picture complete, Mr. Harry, batik and all, was greeted with a kiss from a ravishing beauty, dark and slender, at his door. "Frank Genghis," said Mr. Harry. "I'd like you to meet Miss Toraja. Miss Toraja, Frank Genghis, Australia." Before she moved, Miss Toraja was a timeless fixture in a painting by Gauguin. Then she smiled. "Australia," she rejoiced. Her smile forced Genghis to lift his shades again, just to make sure that her beauty was authentic. "A lovely place you have here, Miss Toraja," he said, nodding in deference, not forgetting his oriental manners. "Mr. Harry has brother in Australia," she announced. The entryway was plush. The ceilings were tall. Miss Toraja was in bare feet on the smooth stone floors, a sublime sensuality. Further in there was a fountain, its silver waters rolling down into a pool and cooling the air with sounds like tropical rain. Genghis was betaken at once. It wasn't a dream. More importantly, it wasn't, all his better senses told him, a ruse by the touts and swindlers he had read about in Lonely Planet. Welcome to the Isle Sarong. It required a physical effort on his behalf to move his eyes away from Miss Toraja's curvy exotica to where they were thanking Mr. Harry, his host, for this hospitality again. He decided he had better lower his sunglasses back into place after all. The following day was all papayas. It began with sunny leisure and ended with kicking back to pina coladas in the delicious ambience of an amber afterglow that splashed across the wide sky. The most obviously impressive affectation of Mr. Harry was his illustrious collection of batik shirts. He emerged in the morning wearing a lime green and scarlet arrangement that almost flashed with sudden rapture. He kept a small army of servants, most of them children, who tended to both he and his guests, scuttling silently around the house, appearing unannounced with drinks and nibbles and hand fans to allay the draining heat. Miss Toraja emerged, still stunning, at midday. Her long black hair held in a ponytail almost reached her petite behind, and she walked with a sultry glide that kept Genghis glancing whenever it was not conspicuous to do so. "I understand," said Genghis after lunch, "that the beaches on the north of the island are the best." Okay, said Mr. Harry. "We go tomorrow." "I wasn't suggesting," Genghis corrected. "I was just asking if—" "The best, yes," agreed Mr. Harry. "Tomorrow we go there, you see." Such hospitality. It was slightly oozing. The afternoon was sticky, but it burst into hot rain at about 3 o'clock, which lasted for 20 minutes and then devolved into steam. At one point Mr. Harry left on business following a phone call, and it befell to the lovely Taraja to keep the Australian entertained. "So, have you travelled much, Miss Taraja?" asked Genghis, making idle. The lady thought it was a humorous inquiry. "No," she laughed. "No? Why not?" "Mr. Harry, he says no." "Ah, I see." It eventuated, in fact, that she had never left the Isle Sarong. She had been born in a distant village, grew up on her father's kava plantation, and only knew the wider world from the tourists and the TV. She expressed an intense interest in Australia. "It's big," Genghis assured her, "and flat. You have kangaroo?" she asked. "Me? Sure," said Genghis. She smiled and her eyes burst with fascination. Her face was small and pretty. Her button nose was crafted with perfect curves of islandish innocence. She reminded Genghis of the dawn of the earth, when the gentle soul yet occupied the unsullied caramels of nubile sweetness. Just looking at her moved him to imperialist song. "What name your kangaroo?" she asked. His name's Skippy," said Genghis. "He's looking after the house while I'm away." Her lips made an O, as if she could hardly believe it, and she moved to sit closer, fawning and captive to his dark mystery. Genghis kept his suave. Mr. Harry returned in an hour or so and took them all to see his shopping malls and to buy some KFC. It was all shiny and replete with modern chromes. It turned out that his pastime, an adjunct to his indecent wealth, was betting on races live from Singapore, several hours behind. Genghis went along to the betting shop, an interior world peopled with hapless locals scratching on slips of yellow paper. After that there was a long promenade crowded with street food vans and vendors selling pulped sugar cane in plastic cups. Genghis took it all in. There were the sights and sounds, the smells and sundries of the busy Isle Sarong, a steamy wonderland of clashing colours and exuberant foliage and evergreen. When the morrow came it was equally as sunny. Mr. Harry, though, was gone. A houseboy told Genghis that he had flown to another island early on business, but he would make good his promise of white sandy beaches by leaving Mr. Raja with a driver who would be there shortly after breakfast. Breakfast was intense. It was a spicy soto and chili rice packed in a banana leaf, bombu, and a goreng and ayam skewers in a fiery satay sauce, and the coffee was sweet and milky and made raucous with cardamom. It was a banquet of torrid flavours, and the hungry Australian ate his fill. Then the driver arrived, and Miss Taraja appeared wearing nothing but a beach wrap, and they set out on a day of coastal adventure. It was one of the finest days of Genghis's hairy-chested existence. The road north wound through tall forest of majestic teakwood, over mountains of dramatic escarpment, prodigious plateaus and young formations of wild igneous stone. There were birds of blue-green and tangerine with butter-coloured beaks and flowers of sapphire shining in the undergrowth of plenty. There were rivers and waterfalls and whole families of villagers on little scooters, grinning with the wind in their teeth as they traversed the daring bends. The beach, when they arrived, was a stretched bow of alabaster perfection. The water was a shimmel of beryl and liquid jewels under a joyous sky. The sand was like white velvet. The tide kissed the landfall with abiding tenderness. Minnows laughed as they swam out of the path of bog-eyed kingfish and the three-finned mackerel. Clubs of seabirds met on rocky outcrops discussing the pristine earth. In this Edenic reverie, Miss Taraja let her hair fall, and our hero drowned his gangly ennui in the warm waves of the sparkling Gulf of Sumba. It was both exhausted and renewed that Genghis felt when he arrived back in the city very late. He went up to his room with a determination to sketch notes by longhand, having plucked ideas for tales and characters from the enduring sea. He lay on his bed in breathless repose for a while, unmoving. He might have drifted off to sleep like that, except that from downstairs came a ruckus and a wrangle. It was the voice of Mr. Harry. It was merely animated at first, then loud, then angry. Genghis couldn't make it out, but he supposed it to be in Bahasa. It lasted for half an hour, then resumed a little later, until finally the house fell silent again except for city noises from beyond the compound walls. Genghis rolled over, looked at his notebook and pencil, but went to sleep on top of the covers before he could muster the energy to move. Over the next few days, the Australian explored the laneways and street stalls of the city on foot. It was a realm of Southeast Asian knickknacks and juicy fruit. The locals all mistook him for Clint Eastwood, but when he explained Australia, they smiled with neighbourly affection and mistook him for an Old Testament Christian. During this time he didn't see anything of Miss Taraja, but when he did one morning, he couldn't but notice the livid swell of her blackened eye. "Who did that to you?" he asked, compelled. She turned away. "Mr. Harry, did he do that to you?" She left the room and he didn't see her again for another several days. By that time the swelling had gone down and the fine-boned beauty of her face had restored the proper proportions of her young and untainted smile. It was clear she didn't want to talk about it. She wanted to talk about Skippy. "Yeah, listen," Genghis began. "I've got to tell you something about old Skip. You see, I go Australia one day," she said, interrupting. Genghis looked at her with sympathetic sunglasses. "Of course," he said. "Yes, you go Australia one day. If that's what you want to do, then you do it. Never mind what Mr. Harry says." She was buoyed by such encouraging words. He gave her permission to dream. The dream was suddenly shaken, however, when the floor below their feet turned momentarily to jelly. The walls went the wobbles, and a silver plaque with abstract designs fell to the ground with an alarming clang. There were thuds and creaking carpentry. The whole house and the wider world all shook and trembled in a fever. It lasted less than a minute. Several staff members ran through after that, and Genghis looked around for some solid support. "What the?" he said. Mr. Raja kept still and listened. Then she broke out of her statuesqueness and said everything was okay. "Earthquake," she said, matter of fact. "Earthquake?" "Not hurt," she said. "Small." More staff went through on their way to assess any ill repair. It was more a tremor than a quake, and a miserly 3 or 4 on the Richter scale, but it reorganised the outlay of the entire afternoon. Utopians forget that paradise is built upon a fault line of tawdry tenderness. The Isle Sarong sits perched on a fire-swept precipice, ever hopeful of the furious earth. It was formed in geological fury and had lived on the edge of wrath ever since. Australia, Genghis suddenly appreciated, is a spent old bag spread out on a table, and she couldn't peak an outrage of geology if she tried. Concerning thus, later, Mr. Harry, back from business again, reported that there was damage to the railway lines and several bridges had been closed, but he explained that it happened every month or so and was merely a fact of life on this particular island. The volcano on the highlands, Mount Boom Boom, was having hissy fits, and villagers were moving their goats down to lower ground. It might mean, though, he said, that production would be interrupted, and this caused him an anxious face. "If you don't mind me asking," asked Genghis, "what exactly is it you produce, Mr. Harry?" Okay, said Mr. Harry. "Tomorrow, I show you." Another invitation materialised from an untimely inquiry. Genghis had in fact asked much of the same of a young girl who came to his room to sweep and change his linen. Where does Mr. Harry make his money? He'd wondered. The servant smiled with a nervous agitation and shook her head to mean either that her English was deficient or she simply didn't know. She looked at him as if he was as mad as a monk, then scuttled to another of her duties. Genghis was growing itchy. Other than the footnote for his memoirs, he hadn't penned a word all week, and his investigative inclinations had him second-guessing the lap of luxury again. It was a bad habit. Every time he found himself an idol of comfort, he started looking for who it was that was pulling all the strings. Never content with a free lunch, he always wanted to meet the man who was picking up the tab. Oh, restless soul! Oh, troubadour of curiosity's incessant wangle! It was the mysteries of existence, as much as rum and cola, that kept him on his never-ending quest. His worst suspicions were fulfilled the next day. Breakfast was spicy again, and Mr. Harry was wearing a batik of gold and apricot with black squares in a bustling rummage of fabric. Then a driver arrived, and the host, the visitor and sweet Taraja, climbed into a car and made for the unsteady hills. It was a sweltering day on the lowlands, so the hills were the place to be. But the air there was misty and thick and unpleasantly obtuse. There was, besides, a layer of ash filling all the updrafts, for the volcano had a tiny tantrum overnight, and the villagers were reporting sorry things about the gods. Storms of the earth are more bitter than those of the sky. They drove to the far end of the island, deep into the jungle. They could see Mount Boom Boom fuming like a dragon, and it seemed for a while as though they were driving directly into its nostrils. They turned off the made roads and headed into the forest, a forest of tangled majesty. There were trees, Genghis could see, several 100 feet tall, and an understory housing white tigers and strange primates of a former age. All was alive with a voluptuous grandeur. The verdant sap of primordial life was ripe in the green bark and many ebullient bamboo thickets. It was paradise unwrangled. This was the ample wonder of naked germination. Luxuriating vegetation overwhelmed the tropical spawn. There were miles of it, unspoilt, bursting forth from the augmented red soils. Genghis kept his usual cool, but inside he was reverent. It was like a vast cathedral of burgeoning verdure with rare hints of skylight seeping through a canopy of thousand-fingered fronds, stained-glassed windows of emerald green. The writer had never seen such raw glory in all his long-legged days. A terrible affront awaited, though, some long miles up the mountain and into the promontory dangling off the mainland. This was where the volcano lurked. A sudden scar marked the earth. The road came to a sign that read in bold American, "New Batavia Logging, Inc." and the ancient forest gave way to bare, rusty desolation. A vast logging operation opened up before them that Mr. Harry was happy to report that had made him unspeakable rupiah. "I see," said the Australie, shocked by the rolling devastation. There were teams of men busy at work ripping down trees with huge machines and mobile stripping plants chugging on dirty diesel in the shelter of the smoking mountain. The machinery munched on timber and spat out the waste as 20-wheeled trucks waited in a muddy circle of systemic greed. Mr. Harry gave instructions to the driver in his Bahasan chatter. There was something he wanted his guest to see. It was the biggest, dirtiest machine of all. He explained that it had recently been purchased from a company in the Netherlands and could clear 100 acres in a single session of mayhem. He pulled up nearby and a foreman named Mr. Wawan introduced them to the monster. It was as big as a factory, as massive as a meatworks, as mammoth as a mine, a cyclopean foundry on titanic wheels grinding up the ground with towers of steely purpose. "Wow," said Genghis, genuinely appalled. Mr. Harry, though, was grinning like a bug. This Leviathan was his latest baby. $20 million Australia, he boasted. 20 million. It was a gigantic implement of death that turned pristine forest into middle-class coffee tables without a second rupture. More instructions to Mr. Wawan. As a special treat, hospitality unbounded, the Australian would be invited not only to gaze upon, but to actually sit inside the rumbling cogs. Mr. Wawan, in his hard hat, showed the way. They climbed up into a platform, walked further along a barricaded strollway, then entered the control centre of the metallic giant. Even more special, the Australian was invited into the cockpit and to sit in the driver's seat at the key exchange and to see for himself the wanton purview of the workers who were making Mr. Harry all his millions. $20 million, you say? Said Genghis. It was worth the sample. From here he could see how it was done. The big chomper would crawl along like a brontosaurus and devour a dozen towering trees in a single gulp. It could easily reduce a rainforest to a mud heap of wood chips in no time. Genghis looked at Miss Taraja. She never said a word. Mr. Harry, though, was nodding and grinning some more while Mr. Wawan looked official and did his best to satisfy the boss. Genghis gripped the wheel. He looked over the front loader. He felt the gear stick. He fiddled with the starter keys. Too easy. "Well, it's certainly a monster, all right," he said. What else could he say? It could, he imagined, make short work of orangutans and the bronze quoll, the red-bellied marsupial shrew, the long-nosed dunnet, the Sumatran bandicoot, the silky cuckus, the copper ringtail, the mountain dugong, Rick Hart's nectar dyak, and countless other endangered mammals, to say nothing of bird life and reptiles, and the whole habitat of the Asiatic elephant. "New," Mr. Harry assured him. "Big production now." But big production was at the mercy of Mount Boom Boom all the same. The volcano was more or less directly above, just a steep incline, and its gods were evidently disconcerted, as Genghis could well understand. Even as the mountain huffed and puffed, Mr. Harry thought that his guest might like a closer inspection. Why not make a day of it? They made their way back to the car and drove up a narrow road until they came to a roadblock manned by troopers who were preventing the curious from entering the danger zone. The vegetation beyond had fallen away. Trees were stunted with sulphur. Ferns were seared from the fuming gases. Beyond a certain point you could feel the noxious odours in your nose. The entire terrain quivered in feminine mystery. Genghis looked out through the car window. Driving into the scalding menace of a live volcano was certainly something new for him. They pulled up briefly and Mr. Harry alighted to speak to the troopers who barred the way. Once again, that's what it takes on the Isle Sarong. The right words will open any door. After a short Bahasa Yabba, establishing that they were talking to an important man in keen sandals and flash batik, the troopers sidled their rifles and moved the roadblock away, and the party drove on through, upwards to the summit, a moonscape of craggy vapours. There were, as it happens, others at the crater's lip, pointing and peering and taking pictures of the larval soups spluttering and bursting from the earth's innards in spectacular reverberation. The quivers would move to shakings and then to sudden convulsions, then back to an uneasy stillness. They drove up, got out, and the air was buzzing with electric tiz. Genghis, Miss Taraja by his side, edged close right up to the lip and realised that it was once again an occasion to lift his trademark glasses from his eyes and see the parcels of reality unshadowed. He gazed on all the colours of fire, He looked down into the smouldering vulva of the earthly cannonade. The crater was smoking. The soil was seething hot. There were fierce paroxysms of passion combusting to the surface from the deep crust of the planet's yearning interior. There were pools of oxidating elements popping with endothermic lust. There were rivulets of boiling bitumen eking from wide cracks of flocculent scabs of otherworldly tufts onto the melting stone. There was the smithy of the Kalan god, the workshop of the swarthy hammerer who beat on the powdery orbits of chloride in the subterranean chalice of creation. Genghis marvelled for a moment at the blatant force. What terrible alchemy drives the tectonic magma? He mused how everyone, in the volcanic menace of their blood, is just waiting to erupt in pyroclastic fits of human creativity if ever the wound of being opens. "It looks like it could blow at any minute," he observed to Mr. Raja, who was still sticking close. Mr. Harry was off somewhere like a man convinced his money and bright shirts could defy a mountain's rage. There was a team of tourists taking snapshots from beside their minivan. "Oh, look here," said Genghis aloud, but to himself. From his coat pocket he lifted a set of keys. They were the keys of Mr. Harry's $20 million monster. They must have fallen into his pocket in the inadvertent roughage of the cockpit while he sat as a special guest at the massive wheel. He pondered. Then, just as accidentally, he dropped the keys over the scalding lip, down into the crater, until, perhaps 80 feet below, they splashed into a bubbling pond of lava. "Damn," he said. Slipped. A shock rippled through the hot terrain. It was, beyond all calculations, the straw that made the camel melt into a swelter, as they say. There was a roaring tremor. The film on the white-hot spume below wiggled and wavered and spilt into a savage slag. Great banks of ash started sliding from the walls. An obsidian coulee of vibrant magnesium started inching up the sides, unstoppable. "Whoops," said the Australian. There was a crack and a moan from deep within the mountain. "I think we'd better be getting out of here, don't you, Mr. Raja?" he suggested. Everyone around the crater had the same idea. The picture session was over. Mount Boom Boom had had enough. There was some confusion thereafter. Amidst the roaring and acrid billows comes the grim realization that you only have a few minutes to get off an angry mountain. Where was Mr. Harry and his driver when you need them? Taking the initiative, Genghis took Miss Taraja by the hand, flung her into an idle put-put, which was parked across a salty rock face, and gave its two-stroke a kick-start with decided deliberation. It whined with kerosene muscle, and without stopping to watch the purple splashes of lava reach the crater's lip, our hero and his damsel zoomed down the mountain track like the proverbial bat out of hell. It was definitely an occasion for dark sunglasses. With his elbows raised and the wind in his handsome hair, he thrashed the pathetic little three-wheeler and gave a prayer to all those souls scrambling down the mountain at that very time. There was no more moment to move the village goat. The workmen at New Batavia Logging Inc. all looked up, screamed and ran for their lives. In a short time, for sure, there would be no more big production, and the monster from the Netherlands would be swept up in an unrelenting lava flow, a vomit of cosmic justice. If Mr. Harry didn't get down in time, archaeologists would find the remnants of his outrageous batik in another 1,000 years. He was a hospitable man, and he had a brother in Australia who lived just near the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But he mistreated women and made his fortune cutting out the heart of paradise. "Hold on!" Genghis yelled out to Mr. Raja. She held her sari in place and her hair from her face and clung tight to the bold Australian as they made a hasty escape. To his great credit, even in these circumstances, the writer was mentally composing another chapter for his memoirs. There he was, I wrote, hurtling down a jungle path in a glorified lawnmower, pursued by a river of red-hot liquid basalt, a gorgeous island beauty by my side. Pure Genghis. No one back in Parramatta would believe him, but it happened to be true. It also happened to be true that when they made it to the end of the trail and scooted at last to the long side of the promontory where the ridge of Mount Boom Boom met the sea, they came to a fishing village only recently deserted. The put-put whined into the main thoroughfare, but there was nobody around. The mountain in the background was getting really nasty. Presumably the locals had decided to stay out of her way. There were thundering cannons of primal urge going off. Boom, boom. And a churning cloud of lightning-struck causticity mingled down with the sea air. The seabirds had thought better of it too. The sky was empty. Everything living had fled to another haven. Genghis decided it was probably the best strategy to employ. Ah well, time to move on. In the harbour, tied to a rustic mooring, was a quite acceptable tanjack with solid rigging equipped with 2 square sails of Sulawesian linen. The hull was sturdy fore and aft and crafted for a village schooner made for net fishing in the shallows and traversing islands all around the long archipelago. Genghis looked up at the angry mountain, then at the placid sea. It was time for a cigarette. He pulled out a Camel and struck a match. "I don't suppose you know anything about sailing, do you, Mr. Raja?" She laughed. She thought of another silly question. "No," she said. "Pity. We could sail away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows," he quoted. She looked at him. She shook her head. She didn't understand. "Never mind," he said. He would work it out. "You like to come to Australia?" he then asked. She smiled broadly. She was genuinely happy. "Skippy?" she asked. "Sure," he said. He would work that out eventually too. As the lava flows made their way towards the coast, the two of them manned the tanjack and in an awkward makeshift drifted slowly from the shore, searching for a saving breeze. At length the sail picked up and the aimless drift turned into a meaningful meander and they sailed away. Thus concluded the brief adventures of Frank Genghis in that humid dewdrop of emerald. The Isle Sarong was not the place to write the great Australian novel after all.